you worked with Lancaster, Jimmy Stewart, and a number of people. Is it better, from a writer's point of view, to know the people who are going to play the principal roles?
Right, to know who you're writing for.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's a tremendous help to know that, I feel.
Yeah.
I find.
You hear their speech patterns while you're writing.
Yes.
Yeah. And you get their comments and criticism.
That's particularly, you know, particularly true in comedy.
Yeah.
When you know, and you can hear those speech patterns. You know how Jimmy Stewart talks. Sure. You know how Bing Crosby talks. You know how Jimmy Durante talks. People who have distinctive points of view and distinctive voice patterns has helped you tremendously.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very, very rare for so many writers to. The writers on this comedy series, the half-hour comedy series, do have that relationship with the actors.
Yes.
You know, but mostly in features, they're kept away from the whole production. So it's a process that we have to deal with. I wanted to comment on a couple of the stars that you worked with. Burt Lancaster, of course, who had his company, Hecht Hill Lancaster, and he did the Western Veracruz and the Rose Tattoo and so on. He really has become a legend in the business in terms of the authority that he wielded and how he ran the place, and the strength that he had in terms of his relationships with everybody. Was he as an autocrat? Was he really that dominating in the pictures that the company produced?
He had a remarkably strong personality. He was a very intelligent man. I would say he had a great deal of influence and impact on everything that he did once he got into independent production. He tried directing, and I think he did rather well as a director, although he didn't pursue it. But he became a better actor the older he got.
Mm-hmm. He went into a lot of character roles as he got older.
Yes, he had to. He no longer was able to run and jump and be the Crimson Pirate as he was once.
Yeah, yeah. There are other people.
The same thing happened to me, by the way. You know.
There were legends about him working out at the studio and using trampolines and all that.
That's right.
But
he had been an acrobat.
Yeah, yeah.
I worked for Bob Hope for a season on his Chrysler Theater series.
Oh yeah.
And I did, you know, producing there.
Yeah.
Producing and writing.
Now that was producing dramatic shows too, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Because that Chrysler Theater was a major television series. I wanted to ask you, now, during all of this time, essentially, you were working as a single writer. I mean, you were working alone, and you were supervising other writers on the shows.
Right.
Julia, Valentine's Day, and so on. So you obviously found, as your career developed, that you worked most comfortably as a single. Is that correct?
True.
Yeah.
There are some people I enjoyed working with, you know, enormously. There are a lot of other people I did not enjoy working with.
Yeah.
But that's true of life, isn't it?
Yeah. Then, about that time, you began to increase your activity in what we were talking about earlier, which is speaking before groups. And all of that humor that we saw in Jack Sue and these other characters was actually coming out of you. What type of groups were you speaking for, like the Publicists Guild, Writers Guild, and so on? What was your activity?
Usually it was people associated with the business. You know, now and then I would do something for charity, like many Jewish groups, Jewish charities, for the City of Hope. But primarily it was groups that you mentioned. You know, the Writers Guild, the Directors Guild. I did a number of shows for the Writers Guild, both as a producer and a writer and participant.
You wrote a lot of those sketches, didn't you?
Yes.
Yeah.
And those were in the days, that was back in the days when the Writers Guild was the hottest ticket in town.
Yes.
We really did some remarkably good shows, and we had casts like Burt Lancaster and Jack Lemmon, And,
doing sketches on stage.
Right. They were absolutely, and great material from people like Izzy Diamond and
Yes.
Ben Roberts and Ivan Goff. And,
Sure.
And didn't you do one of those shows too?
Yes, I yeah, those were wonderful sketches, and we had everybody. But of course, to be honest, those were drinking days too.
Yes,
I mean, everybody was was pretty well along.
There were drinking and dancing days. We all had arches.
Yeah.
Those we don't have shows like that anymore now.
Yeah.
I think that writers all writers take themselves a little bit more seriously than we did.
Yeah.
We took our work seriously, but not ourselves.
Yeah.
Now they don't seem to take their work as seriously as they do themselves.
Yeah.
That's one man's opinion.
Hal, we're going to have a lot of young people watching this cassette, people who are interested in writing. And I wanted to ask you some questions about the writing process itself.
I hope I can answer them.
By the time, at a certain time, it becomes instinctive. But when you were beginning and so on, did you work with prepared outlines? Did you jump right into scripts, screenplays? Do you recall? Did you?
In film,
Yeah.
in film, no. It was always a very detailed outline before we did a word of dialogue.
Yeah. Yeah.
The story had to be worked out completely, and of course you had the advantage of working with knowledgeable producers in those days too.
Yes.
You were working with people like Harry Tugan, Paul Jones.
Yes.
Richard Maybaum, who was
Yes,
the producer.
sure.
And of course Wallace.
Yes. All of them famous names.
Yeah, Jerry Wald.
Yeah.
But you worked. You did really a completely detailed outline before you did a first draft script.
Right.
And then after you did the first draft script, usually a director would be brought in, and you had the advantage of finding out his point of view.
Sure. Sure.
And sometimes there were very good directors, and a lot of times they were not.
Yes.
But you always had the advantage of discussing what you have written with people who are going to put it on the screen before it gets done.
Hal, we were talking about the fact that Preston Sturges and Billy Wilder preceded you at Paramount as writers wanting to direct, and they finally got the opportunity to direct. And in the course of your work there, in working with people as famous as Hal Wallace, Paul Jones, and so on, did that gradually occur to you that you wanted to do that? You wanted to try to direct your own work?
Preston Sturges was a man whose work I had admired for so long.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, when I was still writing radio, I once did a show with Brian Donlevy, who had just come east to publicize The Great McGinty.
Oh, yeah.
And we did an adaptation of The Great McGinty, which I had written. Now, when I arrived at Paramount one day, or after I had been there for a while, I should say, one day there was a knock at the door, and I said, "Come in, my office." And a man stuck his head in, and he said, Simone told me, Simone, who ran the writers group there,
Right.
she was the telephone operator, actually. Simone told me if I stuck my head in this door, I would see myself 20 years ago. And he said, "My name is Preston Sturges."
Oh, gee.
And I was so flattered, because Preston Sturges was a very handsome man. I said, "My God." He said, "Now, I just read a piece of script." He said, "and they told me you wrote that piece of script." He said, "and I just thought it was so delightful, I had to come and introduce myself."
Oh.
I said, "I'm so glad you did." I had been an admirer of yours ever since I can remember. He was back at Paramount to work on a screenplay, which never got made, incidentally. This is toward the end of his career.
Yeah.
And we became very, very good friends. And he was then running a dinner theater on Sunset Boulevard. What was it called? The Maskers, or not the Maskers,
No,
but the Players.
The Players.
And I remember he said to me, he said, "I admire your work so much." He said, "How would you like to do a musical with me?" I said, "Oh, I'd love to, by all means." He said, "I don't have a story yet." He said, "But I do have a title." He said, "And we'll go take it from there." I said, "Oh, what's the title?" He said, "The title is Brigham Young and Tell Him Nothing."
Oh, gee.
We never did write that.
Oh, God.
But he really was a man whose work I admired, and I wanted to be just like him. I wanted to be another Preston Sturges, but there has never been another Preston Sturges.
He was remarkable.
Yeah, he was awfully good at what he did. Billy Wilder also was at Paramount all the time I was there, and he really is one of the supreme screen playwrights of all time, I think. And he also was the best word game player we ever had at Paramount.
Yeah. Did you see him a lot there?
Saw him every day. We had lunch every day almost.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Billy remains, you know, one of the most amusing gentlemen I've ever met in my life.
Yeah.
I guess almost anybody can say that who's met him.
Were you encouraged to direct by Sturges and Wilder? Or?
I don't think I ever discussed it with them. I know that when I did discuss it with D.A. Duran, who was the story editor at Paramount. D.A. Duran, a man I think Charlie Brackett once described as a tower of jello, a man of instant indecision. And I went in to ask him to make an instant decision for me because I wanted to direct. And he explained that he said, I make too much money as a screenwriter, he said, to be allowed to direct a picture. I didn't understand that at all. I said, what does one have to do with the other? He said, well, we can't give you a big picture to direct, he said, because you haven't proved yourself. So you have to start with a small picture. He says, and you don't write small pictures. You write big pictures. I said, well, I can write very small pictures if you want. But it didn't work. Anyway, that's why I left Paramount when I got the opportunity to direct the Goebel Show.
The Goebel Show.
Because I really wanted to direct.
Yeah, sure. Did you feel...
And now I really want to stop directing.
Did you feel at any time in writing for some of those great producers like Hal Wallace, did you feel at any time that the direction or the whole presentation of the film was not what you had in mind? Did you think it could have been better?
I think every picture I ever did could have been better.
Yeah.
If I didn't feel that, I would be lying to myself, wouldn't I? Or I'd be lying to you.
Yeah. But I meant that let's say that the director did not realize what you had in mind.
I think in most instances, what I had in mind was pretty obviously on the paper.
Right.
There are one or two directors who brought much more to the picture than I thought was there. George Marshall, of all people, was one of them.
Yeah.
I did several comedies with George, and what he added to it, the things he brought to it, that I didn't realize were there, I thought were remarkable. George Marshall was a very good comedy director. Another director that I worked with, a producer-director, whose name you will remember, is Frank Capra. I worked on the last film that Frank made. And even though we know all about Frank Capra, anybody who's interested in film knows a great deal about Frank and his work. I found that he brought more to the screen than what was on the paper in the final analysis.
Yeah, well, that's quite a compliment. I wanted to ask you about.
Excuse me. That there was one there was one director whose name I won't mention, even though he's dead, but who did not bring anything to the script or to the screen. As a matter of fact, he took some away.
Oh boy, yeah.
But that's not unusual. You'll find a number of writers are going to feel that they were not well served by a director. I remember years ago sitting in the green room at Paramount, where Simone used to run things, and a lot of writers were sitting around bitching about what directors had done to their script, or what a producer had done to their script, and they finally turned to Izzy Ellenson, a new writer, and said, "What do you think about this, Iz?" And he said, "Well, as far as I'm concerned, gentlemen," he says, "Paramount can take its money and shove it up my ass."
Sturgis and Wilder also had a thrust to direct because of their disappointment in what directors had done. Although you look at those pictures today and they're awfully good. Going from features to television, back to features, and so on. Big differences in what is required and what you want to do. Is that correct? You went to Goebel and then back.
Right. I wanted to do a little bit of everything. I didn't want to be stuck in one route, one route. Right?
Yeah.
One rut. That's the word I was looking for. I wanted to do a little bit of everything, and I still want to do a little bit of everything. You know, I wrote a book.
Yes. I
published a novel. You know, I did literary criticism. I did. You know, I've done a little bit of everything, and I still want to do that. I find that there are more opportunities now to write than there were in the old days. I think that with this technical revolution, there's much more demand for product, you know, for software, as they say. Yet I don't see any giants emerging. You know, the kind of people we had in films, or even in the early days of television. Well, I guess not television, but in films, we really had giants. We had giants on the screen and behind the screen. Today, there are very few giants, and most of the giants we have you're looking at them through the wrong end of the telescope. They're not really giants. They're not going to last. You're not going to be quoting a lot of these people years from now, as today we would quote Capra, Wilder, George Stevens, Willie Wyler, Fred Zinnemann, you know, people like that. They're just not around today.
Yeah.
Although the technique, the technology has improved considerably, I don't think that the writer's mind has improved that much.
Yeah.
In the old days, you know, I say the old days, there was a time when a writer he was challenged to find ways to suggest things that you now show directly on screen. I don't think that's good.
Yeah. You're just speaking specifically of sex, violence, and so on.
Sex, violence.
That you could indicate through very clever
humor too. You know.
Yes. Yeah. You had when you were working, particularly at Paramount, there were many other writers there. You had a contact with each other.
Constantly.
Yeah.
Every day. As a matter of fact, I recall one time when I was working on About Mrs. Leslie, and I had to do a great deal of research on the Civil War because she was a Civil War buff. And Robert Ryan, who played opposite Shirley Booth in that, was supposed to be an authority on the Civil War. So I had to become one. And after spending a week steeping myself in that, I got out of the habit of writing comedy. And then I had to write a couple of light lines. And for the life of me, I just couldn't do it. So I walked down the hall where two friends of mine were at work, Jack Rose and Mel Shavelson. I said, gentlemen, I've just hit a writer's block. I just cannot get, and they laid aside what they were doing and primed the pump for me. They gave me 3 or 4 different jokes that brought me back into comedy. So now, similarly, another time, there was a writer named Burt Lancaster, Jr.
Oh, yeah.
Was writing Strategic Air Command, I believe. Was
12 O'Clock High.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, Byrne was working on this, and he came to me and said, I wonder if you could help me out. He says, I have to do a little scene where the family's having a barbecue, and I'd like to have a joke or 2 in it. I said, sure, absolutely. And I was delighted to sit and help him. Yeah. So that used to happen quite a bit.
Yes.
As a matter of fact, the story has been told that at the writer's table at Paramount, we sat around discussing various problems of the craft. And there was one writer who was working on a story, and he just couldn't quite figure out how to resolve it. And everybody was throwing ideas back and forth. And there was another writer who never said a word sitting there. He figured out how to solve it, and then he went home and rewrote and wrote his own version of it, and he sold it. That man was F.U. Herbert.
Oh, really?
F.U. Herbert. And when his wife divorced him, somebody asked, I wonder why she divorced him. She says, nobody knows. She just came home one day and said, F.U. Herbert.
Leading to questions about the Writers Guild.
Yes.
You have been active in so many capacities in the Writers Guild for so many years. Mm-hmm. You obviously think it's a successful organization, or that its representation is something that works, or do you? How do you feel?
I certainly do. Let me tell this to any new writer who wonders about what the Writers Guild can do for him. When I first began writing in radio, in those days, you would write a complete script. You didn't go in and talk to anybody about it. You didn't pitch any ideas. You didn't investigate on anything. You wrote a script. You submitted that script. They read it. If they liked it, I'm talking about radio drama, Grand Central Station, Lincoln Highway, things like that. If they liked your script, they bought it from you. They bought it for $100 for all rights in perpetuity. Now, I had 2 or 3 shows that had been repeated over and over and over. One of them I knew, I remembered being done on the air 3 times, and I never got another penny. Each time the cast got complete payment, and the producers did, not the writer. Now, if nothing more, what the Writers Guild has done for writers, just in that area alone, just in pay, is worth everything. The pension, welfare, the marketing of scripts, the image of the writers that the Writers Guild now has established and continues to establish is worth more than gold. I think it's a remarkable organization, and I hope that it continues to be a remarkable organization, no matter who's running it.
Hal, what was your first involvement with the Guild? What propelled you into it? I mean, we're all members, but how did you become active in it? What was the first time? Was there any incident that took place?
Yes, in radio. I was asked by a group of peers to run for office at the Radio Writers Guild, and I won. I became the vice president of the Radio Writers Guild. In those days, the radio writers had headquarters in New York, and there were 2 vice presidents, in the East and one in the West. And I became the the president of the vice president of the West. We had a lot of problems in those days because most people, for one thing, radio writers never got credit. There were maybe 2 or 3 writers who ever got credit on radio. Norman Corwin, Arch Obler, Milton Geiger. Those are the only ones I can think of. There may be 1 or 2 others. Oh, there was one later, Don Quinn, who wrote Fibber McGee and Molly. But most writers didn't even get credit in those days. Well, finally we went back east and we organized a Writers Guild of America. It's a long story. I'm not going to go into all of that. But that's when I got involved originally.
And that was a long time ago, Hal.
Oh,
so
yeah.
And you've been active ever since.
It was in the 40s. You know,
yeah, been active ever since.
I've been reasonably active ever since, until the last few years.
There's been one major change in the industry, particularly in screen, and that is there's an extraordinary number of original screenplays that are being sold, being bought by studios now, as opposed to adaptations of novels and so on.
Right.
And that means the doors are open much more for new, younger people. If you were to give them a word of advice in terms of writing what the old saw, writing what you know, and so on, if you were to give these people a word of advice, what might it be?
The word is very simple. The word is write. You just have to write. You have to keep on writing. Don't talk about it. Don't write. After you've written, you can talk about it, but write. That's all.
Hal Kanter, thank you very, very much.
Thank you for asking me to be here.